بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم صدق الله العظيم. Most unrespected elders, young friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes goodness for his creation. And because human beings are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows full well of the nature of man. Allah is the creator, human beings are the creation. What crosses through a person's mind, how he functions, how he operates, what he thinks, what he looks at, what his intentions are, what his purpose of life is, this is all known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in order to guide mankind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his kindness and grace, has given us clear instructions. That if you were to follow these instructions, not only will a person benefit in the hereafter, but he will benefit in this very life. Because every single command, by default, benefits a person in this world. And the complete benefit is seen in the hereafter. Among these very beneficial commands, one very important command, that if a person was to carry out, not only will he experience progress in the hereafter, but his worldly life, his family life, his household life, his social life, his connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be of a very high nature. And a person will at all times experience peace of mind and contentment. This command has been mentioned in the verses which I recited before you, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ. That say, O Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, to the believing men, lower your gazes and protect your chastity. ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ. This is more purifying for them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fully aware of what they do. And after giving this command to the believing men, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then gives this same command to the believing women. وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ. That, O believing women, you also safeguard your gazes and you protect your chastity. Safeguard your chastity. The first window to seduction and temptation is the glance. It is for this reason that Prophet ﷺ has mentioned clearly in a hadith, al-aynani tazniyan, that the eyes also commit zina. وَالزِّنَهُمَا النَّذَرُ. And the zina, adultery, fornication of the eyes is the gaze, the glance. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. And do not go close to zina. This means do not go close to those steps which take a person to zina. And the first step is an-nadhr, casting those passionate sexual evil glances. This is the first step. Thereafter, Nun Misri rahimahullah was asked, what causes a person to sin? So he says, the beginning is that a person lays and he casts evil glances. كل الحوادث مبدأها من النظر. ومعظم النار من مستصغر الشرر ما دام المرء ذا عين يقلبها في أعين الغيظ موقوف على الخطر كم نظرة فتكت في قلب صاحبها فتك السهام بلا قوس ولا وتر يسر ناذره ما ضر خاطره لا مرحبا بسرور عاد بالضرر. A poet very beautifully explains that every single affliction, every single difficulty, every single failure, it starts by the evil glances. Just as majority of the fire or fires are started with small little sparks, in the same manner, the dispute between the husband and wife, marital disputes, breakups, separations, divorces, they start with the glance. They start with these glances. And many a times it's strange women, but many a times it's within the family and the household. It's within the family and the household. For as long as madam al-mar'u dha aynin yuqallibuha, for as long as a person has eyes, he is using those eyes. Fi a'in al-ghaydi mawqufun al-khatar, and he's subject to danger because he's using his eyes and he's capturing those images. And those images are being stored in his mind and his heart. كم نظرة فتكت في قلب صاحبها. How many glances does a person use? And these glances act as poisonous arrows which penetrate his heart. فتك السهام بلا قوس ولا وتر. There's no arrow, there's no bow. And these glances are penetrating slowly into his heart. And he doesn't even realize that now he's entertaining thoughts for his sister-in-law, for his wife's best friend, for those women who he should be avoiding, and likewise vice versa. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this command, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ. O believing men and O believing women, safeguard your gazes. Lower your gazes, especially around strange women and strange men. And again, if someone says that by looking at strange women, it doesn't affect me anymore. It doesn't affect me. I am completely fortified. My heart is fortified. I don't get affected by looking at these type of things. So let us remember one thing, that when a person ages, he's 40, he reaches the age of 50, he reaches the age of 60, 70, 80, physically, he's unable to carry out his physical sexual desires because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the phenomenon of the body. But in terms of glances, his glances are still as powerful as they were when he was young. So he's lost the ability to engage in his physical and sexual gratitude, but the eyes are still as powerful as they were when he was young. There's no difference, even with age. And many people say, through marriage, a person should be, or he should acquire contentment and peace of heart. And this should help a person lower his gaze. But many a times, those who are married are still involved in this illness. Thus, they are at home with their wives, they are at home with their families, but they are unable to enjoy the company of their families because the mind is always occupied with someone else. Someone else is occupying that heart. Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, الشيطان من الرجل في ثلاثة منازل في بصره وفي قلبه وفي ذكره. The shaitan, he plants himself in three stations in respect to a male. Station number one, he plants himself in his gaze. Station number 2, he plants himself in his heart. And station number 3, he plants himself in his private parts. وَالشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَرْأَةِ فِي ثَلَاثَةِ مَنَازِلٍ في غذها وفي بصرها وفي قلبها وفي عجوزها. Likewise, Shaitan, he plants himself in 3 stations in respect to a lady, in her gaze, in her heart, and likewise in her private parts. Rabibin Khathim. Before I get into the stories, the harmful effects of the glances are very, very deep, and they penetrate the heart. And this is something, again, in this day and age, in 2024, living in a country which we are living in, this concept is strange. This concept is foreign. And many of us are probably thinking, this is an outdated topic. This is something which is unapplicable. It doesn't affect me. It won't affect me. I'm living a happy life. Yet, ask anyone who has been, may Allah protect us all, but those separations which do occur, those divorces which do occur, those marital disputes which do occur, there's only one reason, or there's several reasons, but the beginning reason and the main and central focus is the glance. Is the glance. The ulama Ikram have mentioned, by lowering a person's gaze, he experiences many benefits. Number 1, he follows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Number 2, he follows the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لَا تُتْبِعِ النَّذَرَ النَّذْرَةَ فَإِنَّ لَكَ الْأُولَى وَلَيْسَتْ لَكَ الْآخِرَةَ. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said to Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu that do not follow the first glance with the second glance. So many people, they have these sudden glances. A person has to walk on the street. A person has to engage in his daily activities. So we are commanded as believers to lower our gazes. But if a person must raise his gaze, and let's assume by accident or unintentionally his gaze falls on someone that his gaze should not fall on. So this was an accidental gaze. This was an unintentional gaze. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling Ali radiyallahu anhu, فَإِنَّ لَكَ الْأُولَى وَلَيْسَتْ لَكَ الْآخِرَةَ. The first glance, because it was unintentional, it is forgiven. Allah will not hold you accountable. But the second glance, you will now be held accountable for. And if a person is looking at his phone, again, this comes under glances. Many a times, and again, Allah has made the men folk in such a way that 9 out of 10 times, a man will experience arousement. And the women folk, their nature has been made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in such a manner that many of them, on the outset, they don't experience this sexual gratitude and arousement. That's how Allah's system works. Yet both are commanded to lower their gazes. Because once a person allows his gazes to let loose, that's when step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5 occur. So, al-aynani tazniyan. The zina and fornication of the eyes is to look. The zina and fornication of the tongue is to talk. The zina and fornication of the ears is to hear. And the zina and fornication of the thoughts and mind is to occupy the mind and hearts with those thoughts which should not be there. The zina of the hands is to touch. The zina of the feet is now to walk towards her. And then a person confirms this either by fornicating with his private parts or he rejects this. So look at all of these steps which the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned in the hadith. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Do not even go close to any of these steps. Stay far and away from these steps. So benefit number 1, a person will follow the command of Allah. Benefit number 2, he'll follow the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Benefit number 3, اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ فُرْقَانًا. Those who lower their gazes, because the gaze is made out of light. Allah will instill within his heart light and criterion to understand what right and wrong is. This is what furqan is. The ability to distinguish between haqq and batil. Benefit number 4. Benefit number 4. قُلْ هُوَ الَّذِي أَنْشَأَكُمْ وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted everyone ears, eyes. This is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. We find very little people who fulfill the demands of this blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another benefit. Those who safeguard their gazes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them firasa and insight. Another benefit. Imam Mujahid rahimahullah ta'ala mentions, those who safeguard and lower their gazes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates love in their hearts for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many of us who don't experience love for Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the sole reason is because our heart is occupied with love for other things. These other things could be materialistic things, and these other things could be women. So Rabi bin Khathim rahimahullah ta'ala, he was once walking and he had his head lowered like this. And the women folk thought this man was blind. And they used to seek refuge from Allah. They used to seek refuge in Allah from being blind. Whereas he wasn't blind, he was just lowering his gaze. Hassan bin Abi Sinan, rahimahullah ta'ala, once went on a holiday. When he returned, his wife said to him, "You must have looked at many beautiful women." The Shaykh said, "The only thing that I looked at was my thumb." Many a times when men go on holidays, or when they go on a long journey, the wives out of love for their husbands, or out of suspicious thoughts, they question the husband. Where were you? Where did you go? Who was with you? So the wife here is questioning the Shaykh that you must have looked at many beautiful women. And he said, no. The only person or the only thing that I looked at was my thumb. That means I lowered my gaze. So in today's world, it has become very, very difficult to carry out this command, but it's not impossible. I'll just mention one story and then I'll conclude. Sulaiman bin Yasar, rahimahullah, was a great tabi'i. He was among the 7 famous fuqaha of Medina Munawwara. A very great pious alim, faqih, mufti. Once he was traveling with his brother and he left Medina Munawwara. And they stopped at a station near Abwa. And in those days, Bedouins, they used to live in the mountains. So Sulaiman bin Yasar, rahimahullah, was extremely handsome, extremely attractive, but yet very God-fearing. So this lady who was residing on the mountain peak, her gaze fell on Sulaiman bin Yasar, rahimahullah ta'ala. And his handsomeness, attractiveness captured her heart, and she was looking for an opportunity to meet him and make an encounter with him. So when his brother Atta bin Yasar left the tent and she realized that no one else is in the tent, she came down from her mountain peak and she entered into the tent. Sulaiman bin Yasar, he was a very pious person. He thought that this was a poor and needy lady. She's probably here for some food. She probably wants some money. So he asked her, Alaka hajatun. Do you have a need? Do you want some money? Do you want some milk? Do you want some food? She said, no. I want from you what a woman desires from a man. When she said this to him, Sulaiman bin Yasar, rahimahullah ta'ala, started crying and weeping. Just imagine. Just imagine. If we were in his position, what would we do? He started crying and weeping. And the noise and sound of his crying and weeping reached a point where she just suddenly just left the tent. Afterwards, when his brother Atta bin Yasar returned, his tears were wiped away, but he saw streaks and lines of water running down his eyes. So the brother asked him, what happened to you? And he casually tried to avert the situation by saying that I miss my family. I miss my daughter. I miss my son. So the brother said, or the friend said, no, this is not the case. Because it's been 3 days. It's been 3 days. There's absolutely no way that you could miss your daughter and brother and then cry over that. Tell me what happened to you. Then he told him the entire story, and the friend or the brother also started to weep. And he said, if I was in your shoes, I'm not sure if I could resist. I probably would have fallen into this temptation and seduction. They continued their journey. They reached Makkah Mukarramah to perform Tawaf and Umrah. So Nu'man bin Yasar rahimahullah ta'ala says that once I performed Tawaf, after performing Tawaf, I reached Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone. I went near the black stone and I dozed off. I saw a dream. In my dream, Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam came. And I said to Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam that your incident with Zulaykha was very strange. How she tried to seduce you and how you saved yourself. And Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam said to Sulaiman bin Yasar in his dream that your situation with this lady from Abwa is even more stranger. Because I am a Nabi. Yusuf alayhi salam is a Nabi, he's a prophet, and he's protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are a normal layman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to understand the importance of safeguarding our gaze, and may Allah enable us to practice wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alamin sadaqallahu al-azim.